He was with a band called The Gods and King Crimson. Now, The Gods was actually founded by Ken Hensley, who went on to found Uriah Heep, and Mick Taylor, who went on to replace Brian Jones in the Stones. So that had a fair pedigree. Carl Palmer, the drummer, he was with Chris Farlow's Thunderbirds, Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and he was a founding member of Atomic Rooster. What's great about this is 4 days after this band got together, they played to best part of 500,000 people at the Isle of Wight Festival.
I mean, how often does that happen for a band that's been together 4 days?
They must have been. Their reputation must have preceded them.
Really, you're lucky to get a gig of 20 people that soon in your career, and here they're 500,000. I mean, that must have been intimidating.
No, I was lucky enough to be at that particular festival. That's the Jimi Hendrix Isle of Wight festival, and I mean I remember Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They were awesome. They played Pictures and Exhibition, and nobody was playing that kind of music at that time. I mean, it was a straight classical piece. Absolutely awesome.
They had a small lineup change in like the 80s where Carl Palmer left, or he wasn't part of the band, and they had Cozy Powell playing drums. But Carl Palmer is on tour right now.
That's right. And he's called his tour Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy Tour. And that's across UK, Italy, Germany, and America, 7th of August to the 12th of October. So that would be a great concert to go to.
Hawkwind. Their first concert was in 1969.
That's right, August the 29th. And they actually played that particular concert as they called themselves Group X. They changed the name to Hawkwind shortly after that. And apparently this was a 20-minute jam. So I should imagine it was pretty unmemorable. But what is interesting, it was at the All Saints Hall in Notting Hill. And that was quite a famous venue at the time. I mean, Pink Floyd regularly played there. So in the sort of late 60s, that was one of the premier places to play at in London. And Dave Brock was in that original lineup.
And shortly after that, that's when they changed their name to Hawkwind, right?
That's right. And, I mean, they're one of these bands that's had loads and loads and loads of different people through the ranks, including Ginger Baker was with them shortly.
He's in everything.
I know. I can't remember which album it is now, but there's an album called something like Leviathan, and I think that's the album that Ginger Baker's on. But he is, I mean, what a star that guy is. One of my drumming heroes. And they're on tour. You can see them in UK, Spain, and then back to the UK, 4th of August to the 25th of November. But they've got this interesting week in Ibiza, which is Party Central, one of the Spanish islands, from the 8th to the 15th of May 2019. So that'll be an interesting one to be at.
Now, you say Ibiza is a Party Central? I have to claim ignorance. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, it's one of the notorious islands that Brits tend to go to, young Brits tend to go to get extremely drunk and make many new friendships.
Oh, it's Florida for the U.S. That's it. I get it.
Yeah, in fact, the local council are trying to crack down on some of the more extreme goings on there of boozing and sexual activity, basically. But it would be a great place to see Hawkwind.
Up next, we got a lot of first recording sessions.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. This is the Drifters. This is the very famous American vocal group. They actually had their first recording session with a second lineup on the 9th of August 53. Why that's much more important than the first lineup, and it's got quite a strange story, really. 6 weeks earlier, about the 29th of June 53, the first lineup had the recording session. Because what had happened, Clyde McPhatter had just been recruited to Atlantic Records to form, with a remit to form a group. So he pulled in what was essentially the Mount Lebanon Gospel Singers with a guy called David Bourne as the lead singer. They recorded a couple of tracks, and the good people at Atlantic thought they were rubbish, basically, so said, "Well, go away and try again." So he did, and he got together with Bill Pinkney, the Thrasher brothers, Andrew and Gerhardt, and a bass singer called Willie Furby, and they recorded Money Honey. And now this was put out as their first single. So you've got to bear in mind this is their second recording session that resulted in the first single. And that gave them an R&B top 40 that spent 11 weeks at number one. The Drifters took a while before they were successful in the UK. They didn't have their first UK hit for another 7 years with Dance With Me in 1960. But the story gets really involved with the Drifters. And in June 58, George Treadwell, who was the manager, sacked the whole group. And what happened is when Clyde McPhatter got called up to serve in the US Army, he sold his share of the group to George Treadwell, so Treadwell owned the name. And he replaced them with the Crowns. They were both playing in Harlem at a club there for a week. And at the end of that week, he sacked the Drifters, recruited the Crowns, whose lead singer was Benny King, and he renamed them the Drifters. So they became the Drifters. But where the story gets even more convoluted is that Bill Pinkney, who was the in that original lineup on Money Honey, he then decided, well, I'm going to call myself the original Drifters, and he went off and recruited David Bourne, who'd been the lead singer with the Mount Lebanons, who were at that first recording session, and the Thrasher brothers, Andrew and Gerhard. And he called them the original Drifters, and they actually won a lawsuit to keep that particular name. And if you can imagine, with that lineup, Bourne, Pinkney, and the Thrasher brothers, they had more right to perform as the Drifters than the Benny King group. That really became the way of the Drifters. There have been so many different bands. In late 71, Charlie Thomas, who was a later lead singer with the group, he broke off and formed his own Drifters group. But in 72, because what happened, the Drifters in America, their commercial success died away in the late 60s. But in 1972, they relocated with Faye Treadwell, who's the daughter of George, the original manager, to the UK. They generated what was the third generation of the Drifters, and they had a lot of success in the UK in the 70s. And they've different lineups, obviously. They've had reputedly 60-odd people through the various lineups of the Drifters. But they're on tour of the UK at the moment from the 3rd of August to the 23rd of November.
Sounds like they're the band that's had the most different iterations of the lineup.
I mean, they've had about 7 or 8, maybe more, lead singers, defining a lead singer as somebody who's, had a hit record. They've had so many different lead singers. People tend to associate Benny King as the main lead singer, but he was only with them for a couple of years, 3 or 4, or maybe 5 hits.
August 13th, 1954, one of my favorites, Mr. Chuck Berry.
Oh, absolutely. He made his first ever recording on the 13th of August 54. But he was a member of Joe Alexander and the Cubans. I Hope These Words Will Find You Well, coupled with Oh Maria, were the 2 songs they recorded and put out as a single on the small ballad label in America. But it's just interesting to see that Chuck Berry started out in the early part of the 50s, but at that time, before he found personal success, he was playing in a Latin band.
Chuck Berry is so influential, not just in his guitar style, but Angus Young copied the duck walk. Now you saved the best for last, Derek.
David Bowie. Now he had his first ever recording on the 30th of August, 63. It's the 55th anniversary of that. We tend to think of Bowie very much, he was very big much later, but he was part of a band called the Conrads. As well as singing, he played saxophone, but he was called David Jones at that time, and they recorded I Never Dreamed. But I thought it'd be really interesting to just have a quick look at the Space Oddity story. It's a major part of Bowie's career, but he was so nearly just a one-hit wonder. He tried for success in so many different bands. I mean, Space Oddity itself actually started out in a recording around the January 69. It was for a 30-minute promo film called Love You Till Tuesday, and that was designed to get out to various people who matter to get Bowie to a wider audience. That soundtrack itself wasn't released until '84, and it was released on Derham. Just to put Space Oddity into perspective, it was released in the UK on the 11th of July '69, and it entered the UK charts a couple of months later on the 6th of September. It got to number 5, and then Bowie, he just fell off the radar screen again. But if you look at it, how he tried across the 60s with multiple bands, so many singles, it's incredible. I just mentioned the Conrads, when it all started. He was in the King Bees, the Manish Boys, and then the 16th of September '65, he decided to change his name from Davy Jones to David Bowie. Didn't want to be confused with the monkey, David Jones, and he was inspired by the Alamo frontiersman legend, Jim Bowie. And then after that, he was in more bands. David Bowie in the Lower Third, David Bowie in the Buzz. He was in the Riot Squad, and one of the founding members of that was Mitch Mitchell. He was in a sort of arty, mimey theatre group called Turquoise, later became Feathers. And around this time now, he released 6 singles on Vocalation Pop, Parlophone and Pi, and 3 singles on Derham. So he released 9 singles before Space Oddity. He had a couple of albums. His first album was on the Derham label in '67, called David Bowie. And then, interestingly enough, he moved to Philips, 1969, released his second album, also called David Bowie. And that's the one that contained the Space Oddity song. So on the 6th of September '69, Space Oddity entered the charts, and it actually featured Rick Wakeman on keyboards. To all intents and purposes, he fell from the scene again. So before his first really big hit in the UK, which what established him, was Starman. But that wasn't until mid-1973, so it's a good 3-4 years away. And he was in more bands. He tried out with, he put a band called Hype together. What's useful about them is that was first time with Mick Ronson, and they were performing as Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Well, I say performing. They weren't known by that name yet, but the lineup that became Ziggy Stardust, mid-71. And then he had 3 more singles on Mercury, another one on RCA. He had 2 albums which didn't bother the charts at all. The Man Who Sold the World and Hunky Dory. And then the story started for him. He started the climb to fame. 5th of May 1972, he released Starman off the Ziggy Stardust album. And it began his run of hits. He had sort of 70 plus in the UK. But just to finish the Space Oddity story, it's continued to be a major part of him. 24th of February 1973, it entered the Billboard Top 40. It gave him his first American hit until he got to number 15. But it was another 2 years before Young Americans was a hit for him in America in 1975. And it's not over in the UK for Space Oddity either. On the 11th of October 75, it entered the UK charts, and believe it or not, it gave Bowie his first UK number 1. So Space Oddity is a really interesting story, and Bowie was so nearly a one-hit wonder.
So it took several years for it to catch on in the US, it sounds like. Absolutely.
He didn't have anything like the number of hit singles in the US either that he had in the UK. In the UK, he had, depends how you count them and which numbers you work from, but certainly, he's in the sort of 70 region in the UK, but much more like 20, maybe 25 in America.
Well, Derek, you want to give everybody your social media?
You can find me on Facebook at Rock'n'Roll Unravelled and Twitter at RNR Unravelled, and the website, lots of stuff, is www.rock'n'rollunravelled.com.
Awesome. Derek, I thank you so much for joining me this month.
I really enjoyed chatting to you.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers, mate.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff. Tune in again next week. Same time, same space, same station.
resistance is futile.